Coming up in today's show.
Apprehensive on the basis of a previous exchange that he mightn't be, entirely au fait with the COVID crime. I said, you can't really believe in anything that you see on that. And he said, what? And I said, well, it's completely bought now. It's completely different. It's not the same as it was when I was there.
I think the people who are going to wake they've woken up to it. But I reckon there's a lot of people who intend to go down. I think it was Swan Lake or something they played as the Soviet Union was entirely collapsing.
Yeah.
So this kind of pseudo-reality can go so far until it ends. Everything now is so safe. And all of a sudden, here is this virus, as they called it. And you have to do these things to survive.
Real money, which is based on gold. We used to be based on gold. And that means if you do a day's work, you get the value of that day.
Yeah, and I'm going to put my 2025 on the table. I'm watching the stock market very closely.
Not all superheroes wear capes. Some wear wellies.
Hello everyone and welcome to the James Conway Experience, and I have a guest with me today that I've been really looking forward to getting here. A writer, a journalist, a poet, a genius in my opinion, and usually we start off the show with a little bit of background on that, but we're not going to waste time with that. You need to look into this man's background. The absolutely wonderful John Waters. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, James. Thanks. That's a bit of hype there, huh?
Well, I read something 2 weeks ago, and I said, when John's on the show, I'm going to say that to him. It really reminded me of you, and it was a fella. He was a sniper in the American Army for years, and he says the talented hit the targets that no one else can, and the genius hits the target that no one else can see. And I think you're in that realms. I think for years now, you have highlighted things that people that weren't cognitive of the time, like your book, Give Us Back the Bad Roads. Yeah. Anyone should read that, because I think you really opened people to what was coming in Ireland before they could see it themselves.
I kind of felt it, but now I have to, in fairness, say that I also missed things, James. I mean, there are things I didn't see, and quite significant things. But because we're living in this, I call it pseudo reality, and we have been for a long time. So you pick up certain things. I would say, I certainly did pick up a lot of things. I mean, when I was in the Irish Times, I started there in 1990 and I became a columnist in January 91. And the teams, I mean, if I look at my stuff then, I can stand over an awful lot that I wrote, because I was hitting the target pretty much every second week anyway, with the different things, because I was talking about the EU, I was talking about transnational corporations, I was talking about the attacks on family, I was talking about the attacks on nationhood, the attacks on transcendence, on faith and religion and all those things, spirituality. And that's the nexus of issues that have been most visibly attacked in the recent past. And I was doing that from various different angles. So I was kind of, aware of things to some extent because of just the kind of life I was living, the kind of things that were happening to me. The family thing, having a daughter out of marriage, that experience really woke me up to an awful lot. The corruption of the family courts, and by extension, I was writing out of that. But again, if you look back, it's interesting. You'll see that I kind of get it, but I don't get it. Mm-hmm. I misunderstand it. I misinterpret it a lot of the time. It took me a long time writing about things like feminism and all kinds of issues in that context, like domestic violence and so on, male suicide, to understand that there was a pattern here and there was a program here. And I realise now that what I was really looking at was a kind of a nearly pilot scheme. This was happening everywhere. To test out how much abuse would a human person take and still continue to believe in the system.
Well, you see, I think we're at the nexus of that now. I think the people who are going to they've woken up to it, but I reckon there's a lot of people who intend to go down with the ship. And I sometimes think, I spoke to a guy one time in England. He was a very well-regarded boxer, you know, and he was after losing a fight. And he says, it was the finest beating I ever got in my life. And I feel now, looking around me, I look at what they've done and I say, my God Almighty, this was well planned and it was well done. Do you know?
That's right.
And you know, it's not admiration. I don't admire them for it, but I can take a step back and go, wow, they intended to destroy nationhood and they really done it.
They did. And one of the things that they did was we didn't really grasp, and I don't know if a lot of us have yet grasped it, is that this was so unprecedented.
Yeah.
And they knew that we were pre-programmed to anticipate certain results arising from certain events, cause and effect.
Yeah.
But they knew also that we would overlook or underestimate the effect of their achieving certain unprecedented mechanisms. For example, the total corruption of the media.
Yeah.
Nobody really understood what that would be like because it hadn't happened before. Because up to that point, people had been looking at the media, even though they wouldn't necessarily admit to it, that was the source of their information.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like journalism was the source of most information in the mainstream of society, not just in the culture, but actually of even people who regard themselves as, you know, very intelligent, educated experts maybe in their field. I said this in the Supreme Court because it was an allegation made when I was in the court addressing the court on the question of the lockdown thing that we took, and we got to the Supreme Court on the application, and there was an allegation made by the lawyers for the state that I wasn't an expert, and therefore wasn't entitled to comment about any of the things that we were submitting or arguments about. And I said, well, you know, in a funny way, I am an expert. I'm an expert in going to experts and getting them to put their expertise into comprehensible sentences.
Yep.
That's what a journalist is. And I says, everybody, one of you, judges, virtually 100% of what you think you know comes from such a source.
Yep.
You read it in the newspaper. It is distilled down. You possibly, you know, you're an expert in the law, but you wouldn't necessarily be an expert in microbiology or in nuclear physics. If you know anything about those subjects, it's because a journalist went to a nuclear physicist or a microbiologist and distilled the expertise down into a comprehensible few paragraphs, which has given you the total extent of your knowledge of those subjects, probably.
Is this the danger with regards to, you know, people think everything being free is a good thing. They think, you know, free information, this, that, and the rest of it. But what I see happened is, with the onset of the internet and the proliferation of internet news and all of this, that undermined the print media and then the televised media to such an extent that really the only thing that could keep them afloat was the government. So
Yes.
they became water carriers for the government. Like we have a local radio station to hear, you know, and, you know, it's not doing well. And the only thing that, as far as I can see, that keeps them afloat was your COVID-19 ad. You got your funding, your state funding. You see, when you have all this state funding and it's really the only bit of reliable income stream that there is, all of a sudden you start doing everything in your power not to rock that boat.
That's exactly right. And what it has meant is that what it's meant is that the newspapers and radio stations and TV stations that we had always assumed were the conduits of knowledge, information about reality yesterday or earlier today, are no longer doing that at all. They're actually giving us now narratives which are generated by the government. And everybody is now living in that pseudo-reality.
Yes.
And so, but they believe in it, you know. I mean, it's like every night that there's a bunch of guys run onto the streets with planks and sheets of plywood and build a new set in front of people's eyes for today.
But isn't that like at the fall of Soviet Russia? I watched a fantastic documentary on it, and if there was ever really bad, something really bad going on in the Soviet Union, they'd put on a ballet or an opera on the state television.
Yes.
And I think it was Swan Lake or something they played as the Soviet Union was entirely collapsing.
Yeah.
So this kind of pseudo-reality can go so far until it ends.
Well, I was recently talking to a friend that I hadn't spoken to for a long time, and you know, he's a very nice fellow, very intelligent guy, you know, and so on. But I was kind of somewhat apprehensive on the basis of a previous exchange that he mightn't be, you know, entirely au fait with the COVID crime. And so I was somewhat nervous about talking to him because it seemed that the subject would come up, and I wasn't sure how I would deal with it. Like, could I come at him straight on and say, no, it's a hoax, it's a hoax? So I was trying to avoid it. And luckily, he's such a smart guy that we were able to talk about other stuff. And I was able to get a sense that I was right, first of all, about him from the way I was approaching the territory. But we were going okay, and there was a couple of disagreements about, as you can imagine, Trump, etc., but nothing dramatic. But there was a moment when I just said to him about the media. I said, you know, you can't really believe in anything that you see on that. And he said, what? And I said, well, you know, it's completely bought now. It's completely different. It's not the same as it was when I was there. And he looked at, it's like he'd never had this thought before. He kind of went, oh, and that's the point, James, that you see, it's like you're driving a car and what's in the mirrors is not what's behind you. It's a video of something. Or it's a bit like, in another sense, it's a bit like, as I've said before, driving a car in which all the windows are blacked out, all the mirrors are blacked out, the windscreen is all cracked. You know the way that they use the old style windscreen, just go and shatter. And you've managed to put a hole in it with your finger. Yeah. And that's your sole way of finding out what's going on outside the car and seeing where you're going. And you're trying to drive in these circumstances. Yeah. But it's that people they're doing that, but they're not aware that they're losing anything, that there's anything else that they need to know other than what they see through this hole. Well,
you see, this is where, and I'm happy to be part of that kind of community myself, of people who have broken away entirely and have gone, no. Now, the other side of that too, that can leave you in a bad place where it's very difficult to believe in anything, do you know? And that's not good for the human condition either, I don't think.
Yeah.
But we've broken away and we've said, if I can feel it, if I can smell it, if I can taste it, it's real. That's what homesteading and that is to me.
Yes.
So I look at when you get up in the morning, what has to be done around the house, all the rest of it. If I can feel it, if I can touch it, if I can taste it, it's real. I think an awful lot of people, if they were to awaken to that, it's the whole emperor has no clothes thing. You know, I'll put this to you, and I don't think I'm too far off the mark. I think Ireland is about to be used as an example to the world of what happens to a nation when they go down the left-wing woke route and also go against the state of Israel. I think we are going to be made an example of internationally.
Well, you see, this is a very interesting point, James. I mean, because it has long struck me about this. People talk about various ideologies in this, they talk about, you hear people throwing around terms like communism or socialism or fascism or whatever. And it has seemed to me to be very clear from the outset that the people orchestrating this don't give two figs for ideology of any kind.
No.
They have no beliefs.
No.
Their only belief is in their success, in obtaining control of the entire world and its resources, and the enslavement of its entire population, and nothing else. So what happens then, why you can see the traces of these ideologies, is that they're being used as software in order to drive the agenda forward. So they will use an ideology in the program, and that's what woke is. It's the weaponization of different ideological tropes, so that they will attract the people who believe in those ideas. And they say, well, I'm a socialist, so, of course And that the COVID thing was extremely well adapted to that. I mean, it was immediately almost on the first day recognizable as a left-wing virus, as it were. Which is nonsensical when you think about it, but that was the bizarre thing about it. You could imagine the people that you would see supporting it were people who had left-wing ideas. And you could imagine like newsrooms, which previously would have had a mix of different kinds of people, maybe mostly leftists. But now they were kind of protecting this ideology, this phenomenon, the virus, the pandemic, as an entity, on the basis of their loyalty to some kind of idea of, socialism maybe, but more kind of specific and practical than that, some idea of what they would regard as compassion, looking after the most vulnerable, this kind of thing, that there was a righteous, moralistic kind of idea behind the whole thing. And that was one of the driving agents. All these things were used in order to divide people and to create different teams.
Yes.
And in my view, I've actually come to the view now, James, that the most defining kind of way, the best way or the clearest way that I've seen yet, there's one I've come up with, of what's happened, is a kind of a game.
Mm-hmm.
That was designed as a game. And that you say the COVID thing had all these arcane rules, which made no sense. They contradict each other. But if you think you get a new game in a box for Christmas, you have to read the rules. There's a little booklet, and none of them make any sense in the real world.
Yep.
But you learn them off, and you argue with your opponents. No, this is wrong. You're doing, it's €9 for the meal, and it's not $9.99. And so on. So that was kind of what they created. And you just think about that. A game is a very interesting thing, because in a game, I'm sure, you have friends who play, like, I don't know, it could be even, forget about football and those real sports, but like something like darts or pool or table tennis.
Yep.
You watch the emotions
Yes.
that are at play in those conditions, where somebody is losing
Yep.
and his whole sense of self is at stake.
Yes.
Well, if you can weaponize that in the real world, imagine what you can do. Well, they did. And so there's a lot of, I've written in the book I've come out next year, the last chapter is about that. And I had written this idea 3 years ago first, but when I went back and looked at it, I wasn't going to include it because it seemed to me to be too slim and too thin and kind of slightly off the point in some respects. But I went back and I've rewritten it now, and it's the last chapter in the book, and it's a very long chapter, but I think it's actually the centerpiece of the whole thing. And so, you're not talking about ideology at all. You're talking about far more sophisticated thinking about the world and about human beings. Because, people talked about, say, COVID having weaponized and tapped into the religious instincts of humanity, which is certainly true with the idea of ritual and washing your hands and all that kind of stuff, And that case has been well made. But the play instinct in humanity goes way, way back before the religious instinct. It's one of the earliest. I mean, in fact, it's so early that animals play as well. It's an animalistic kind of response to reality. And they've actually managed to tap into that. This is the level that you're dealing with.
Have they tapped into something too, which is the primal desire for survival? That they looked at us as a society, and Ted Kaczynski wrote this, the in the Unabomber's manifesto that you don't have to be particularly good at anything now to survive. You know, if you can drag yourself to a 40-hour week and do what you're told whilst there, you'll earn enough money to survive. Everything now is so safe. And all of a sudden, here is this virus, as they called it. And you have to do these things to survive. Had they tapped into that as well?
Yeah. Well, that kind of goes with the whole idea of what they've done with economics, which is a completely unviable concept now. I mean, the idea that, you know, you have to justify yourself in terms of costs and you know, profitability, etc., in any context now is bogus, because what they've done is they've broken that system completely and they're living in the future. They've stolen from the future. They're constantly stealing from the future, even though there is no future and even though they have no way of repaying it.
Yeah.
And what they do is just kicking the ball into the stand all the time. And they're hoping that they can do that ad infinitum, which of course in theory anyway, they can't. Now this is where we are at this moment, where they're trying to find a way to square that circle. But they're in that situation where, you know, like everybody now, and Ireland in particular, for reasons that we can go into, is caught in this kind of idea. Like, we're supposedly one of the richest countries in the world. It's complete nonsense, obviously.
Yeah. Well, if you go by the GDP to salary ratio, that would indicate that every man, woman and child in Ireland is earning roughly 120,000 euros a year.
Yeah,
it's a ridiculous figure.
Well,
it's not happening.
Yeah, and look at what's happened in the last year. I mean, our economy, our indigenous economy, which is essentially agriculture and tourism and a few bits and pieces,
It's been destroyed.
It's gone, and it's been damaged out of all recognition in the last 5 years. Like, it was never really a kind of a huge phenomenon. I mean, the beef was good and the tourism was, you know, what it was, but now they've damaged. They've basically destroyed farming. By attacking the very basis of it with their climate agenda, and they've destroyed the tourist industry by filling the hotels with foreigners, you know, who aren't tourists and who have no money pretty much to spend. They have some money, it's a sustenance money, but when you look at the history of Ireland in the last 30, 40 years, I mean, we're entirely dependent on foreign direct investment, FDI, pretty much. And that has made us into the richest country in the world. You know, and I call it, the analogy I came up with years ago was that it was like, you know, our grandfathers had left us a shop.
Yes, on the flat.
In the main street, and there was a flat upstairs, and we couldn't think, well, what do we sell in the flat, in the house, in the shop? And we were looking at it, and there's a cafe across the road. We'd sit over there drinking coffee and looking up the window at it. And what do you think we could listen? What do you think we could sell in that house shop? You know, and in the end, we come up with a brilliant idea. We live in the flat and rent out the shop.
Yeah.
Well, now we're paying the price for that.
Yeah. Big
time. Because they now own our country.
They do, but I had David Riley here last week, and he brought up an interesting point. He said, you know, when does a society recognise that they were complicit? And they don't, and they never have.
No, because they didn't understand the concept. People, you see, you notice this yourself, James. Like, if you say something to people about debt, and you say, oh, there's a massive debt now which is crippling the world.
Yes.
And someone would pipe up, oh, sure, they can just print more money.
Yeah, but but
that's an objective nonsense. I said to them, but if that were the case, they can do it today and they can do it tomorrow and they can do it the day after. But there will come a day when the invoice will come in for that, and they will have to pay the invoice, because these are real debts. Yeah. They have to be, because someone has the chits in their top pocket. Yeah. And that's BlackRock, by the way. Yeah. So somebody's going to have to pay the piper one day, and this is something they just cannot get their heads around because they're so used to this. And of course, the other point is economics, as a scientist, doesn't talk about this very much. Mm-hmm. It's not interested in talking about debt.
Well, you see, if you go back to the the Austrian school of economics and that, you know, they pointed it out exactly for what it was, which is you're thieving from your grandchildren so you can be better off today. You know, that's all you're doing. Now, it's a funny thing, if you take that loan and you do something productive with it, that the money can be paid back, no government is doing that, because governments by their very nature are unproductive. You know, there's how many departments in the Irish government? I would say the Department of Agriculture and Marine probably turns a profit. The rest don't. Do you know?
That's right.
So if you have governments, taking out massive loans, by their very nature, they're non-productive loans. Now, if they were doing something like building a motorway to connect one city to another, so more commerce could happen, well and good. If you're bringing in people from all over the world and paying subsistence money to just keep them alive, all of a sudden you've created a dire bad situation. So
you have. You see, there's, again, people think of money as a constant entity, and it's not. There are different categories of money. You know, there's real money, which is based on gold. We used to be based on gold. And that means if you do a day's work, you get the value of that day in your pocket. And then you can buy goods equivalent to that. And there's a constancy. You know, there's an equilibrium in the system which is maintained by the gold, because gold is a scarce commodity, and in that sense is analogous to the effort that's required for you to get out of bed and go out and do that day's work, and otherwise as well. That's the balancing quantity that once they took the gold out of it, that was lost. Yeah. And so it then the stock markets became the defining factor in economics, and so in effect economics became a kind of a roulette table, nothing to do with endeavour at all, really. I mean, the level of the human endeavour is like a microscopic element of economics at the moment, at this stage, because it's all about gambling. Yeah. People betting and making negative bets on countries' chances of survival, and so on and so on and so on. Madness, utter madness. And how could a world like that be other than mad? And what's happened now is, like Ireland, there was two particular categories of money that afflicted Ireland. One was dirty money, which is the money that was swishing around the economic system in Ireland because it's tax dodging money from the corporations. And that, of course, is a dirt. But I mean, we the people of Ireland, whether we like to admit it or not, including myself, including you, James, you know, we have been living off immoral heirlooms for years. Yes. That's the first. The second category of money is fake money, which has been used to kind of counteract the effects of that to some extent and try to keep some kind of false equilibrium going. But that's made up money, which is all made up money, but it's just generated on computers. There's no gold to kind of have as a steadying factor within the system. So they're just generating more and more money. And what they're doing now with that money, it's very interesting to see it. You would think, okay, so we have access to unlimited amounts of free money. Well, that should, in a certain sense, be a good thing in the short term, because it means, well, we can build more hospitals, we can build more schools, we can fix the potholes. Well, you just look at the roads around Ireland now. The only thing that's been fixed is cycle lanes. Yeah. All the roads where the cars go are like, they're dangerous. A lot of them are, except for the motorways, which are not ours at all. These are the transnational routes. I wrote, this is one of the points of my book title, Give Us Back the Bad Roads, because a route is a different thing to a road. A road is for human beings to access certain places and go from A to B and B to A. A route is a different thing. A route goes only in one way, and that's where it is delivering the goods which destroy the productivity of the native population.
Well, I'm starting to look around rural Ireland now, and the changes that have occurred are absolutely outrageous. Yeah. And you're looking at parishes now that once had 20 to 30 families, and now there's maybe 3, 4. But if one of the younger people build a big house and they do a nice job on it, you have these kind of politicians and that who say, "Oh, it's vibrant. Oh, you see, it's new."
Oh, yeah. We're a self-confident nation.
Yeah, but you see, like tonight is New Year's Eve that we're recording this, and I'm going to put my 2025 on the table. I'm watching the stock market very closely, and it appears to me to be at a height now that's a top. I don't see it going anywhere other than down this year.
Yeah.
And I reckon from an Irish perspective, with Trump the last couple of weeks, and I sent you on his Commerce Secretary and that Lutnick or that.
Lutnick, yeah.
They're preparing the ground for a massive recession, and they're beginning to speak about the Biden money printing and the consequences of it. I think they're fully cognitive that they know what's coming. They know there's a massive downturn coming. But America will come out of it better. I really reckon Ireland by this time next year is a very bad place.
Oh, well, I mean, Ireland and Europe in general, because, you see, they have capitulated to the American monolith in military terms and otherwise, and in terms of money in particular. Like, they you know, a lot of the money that is flowing into Europe for on the basis of their industries or whatever is being reinvested in Wall Street.
Yeah.
It's the dollar that they're sustaining, not the euro. The euro is going to collapse. The euro has, you know, and that's a real danger. That's fair. But you see, at the core of this is the problem. You see that this issue of, as I say, kicking the ball into the stand. You know, it's a good tactic for a negative team for a short period, but it's not going to win you matches.
No.
And there comes a moment when you can't do it anymore. In economic terms, there's certainly a moment when, you know, the balloon can be given one more puff and then it bursts.
Well, can I put this to you, John? After World War II, the period 50s, 60s onward, the population on a whole was much younger.
Yeah.
Are we in the consequences at the moment, especially in Europe, Western Europe? An older population on average is less dynamic. It's less willing to rebel against systems that are in place. It seems to me it's very safe. It just hold on to what you have and all the rest of it. Are we paying the price now for, especially Ireland? Like, we have exported our youngsters. They're gone.
Well,
are we paying the price for letting
we
that
are,
happen?
James, but it's a more complex equation than that, I think, in this. Yes, of course. And the solutions that are being proffered are completely bogus. I mean, mass inward migration, it's called. I mean, you know the way that these politicians and slimy journalists keep, he's anti-immigration. I don't know anybody who's anti-immigration.
Yeah.
That's a nonsense.
Yeah.
What people are anti at the moment is mass inward coercive plantation.
That's right.
Invasion.
Yeah.
And that's this proffered in as a solution to our demographic crisis, our aging crisis, and so on. Which is a completely bogus thing, because for one thing, off the top of my head, AI will supplant most of the jobs that people are being brought in to fill at the moment.
Yeah.
Within 10 years, those jobs will be gone. So we will have the migrants, but we won't have any use for them, and they will be looking for their sustenance, and we won't have the means to provide it. But the other point about this, James, is that this is a completely bogus, false hypothesis that has been promoted here, that somehow, and I know it is certainly the case, that it appears that Europe is in terminal decline, but that's only because of the solutions. It's not because of the problem. We in Ireland had a serious demographic crisis before in the 1950s, which arose from how few people were getting married.
Yes.
It was a serious crisis.
Yep.
And there was literature, books written about it, mainly in America, by the way,
Yep.
involving Irish writers, Irish thinkers and so on, but not directed from internally.
There was a couple, you can get them on CR, is it CR Video Vaults, Jared? Is that the name of it? CR Video Vaults, yeah. There were foreign psychologists who were coming to study the effects of loneliness and stuff, because there was vast parts of rural Ireland that
Yeah.
had been abandoned at the time.
Yes, right.
you know?
And I remember actually, was it, what's he called there, man, the playwright?
John B. Keane, was it?
No, the Dublin guy he's a kind of a lefty. What do you call him? Anyway, he wrote all those plays, about Dublin in the time of the lockdown, or the Larkin and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
What do you call him? Anyway, it'll come back to me. It's just one of those senior moments, James.
Don't worry
Sorry.
about it.
But he actually had a phrase, Ireland is withering, he said. That was a very, very resonant phrase at that time. And there was serious concern about it. And
Yeah.
it seemed to be an intractable problem. But it was solved
Yeah.
by our own lights. We're no longer permitted to do things by our own lights, you see.
Yeah.
We don't have the people to lead us into doing things. We did then. We had people like Lemass, which are, and we could get into a controversy about whether or not Lemass was the original instigator of the FDI model that has destroyed us. But I don't believe that Lemass intended to be used as anything more than a booster rocket, or indeed Whittaker, a booster rocket that would get us off the ground, and then we would build on that. And what we would do, I mean, if we had been clever, what we would be doing would be looking, when Apple and all these crowd came in here, we'd be sort of looking over their shoulders. What are you doing there, boss? And we'd be making notes, and we'd say, okay, like, boss, we figured that out now, clear off.
Yeah.
We're doing it ourselves now, boss. We're orange. We've started a new
Well, that's
car.
what the Chinese have done.
Yeah. But we never did that. And not only did we not do that, James, but we never developed our educational system to train even people into the intricacies of what was needed in those industries. As a result of which, they all started employing people from outside, which is the biggest factor, actually, in our demographic crisis now. The fact that we have about 1.5 million to 2 million of aliens living in Ireland who have no love of Ireland and no reason to be here, only what they're making out of it, and who are now threatening to dwarf the indigenous population within a couple of decades.
Well, I think on top of that, you put the rate of death that's occurring at the moment.
Yeah.
And, I used to read things and it was on about 2050 that it would be a 50-50 split. I think that's ludicrously optimistic now.
Yeah.
I think around 5 to 10 years, you're looking at a massive
I think
demographic.
10 years will make a wild difference. I mean, first of all, James, I don't actually believe the figures they're giving us.
No, neither do I. And the other side of it too is something like a census. If you're in a nation illegally, you don't fill in the census. You don't.
That's right.
You don't.
Even if you are, I didn't fill in the census, James. And I'm here legally.
Yeah.
I was born here. I took a holiday in Belfast that weekend.
Yeah.
For the precise purpose of not filling out the census.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to tell them how many rooms I have in my house.
Such a question.
Yeah.
And I can't. There's a significant problem, John. And the Masons are strong on this. They believe that if you're guilty by ignorance.
Yeah.
So basically, if you're given the information and you do something stupid, it's your own fault. You're guilty by your own ignorance,
Yes.
So we had a government who were asking everyone, how many rooms have you in your house, by the way? How many cars do you have? And then all of a sudden you had this influx of refugees and all this coming at the same time. And people couldn't connect the dots.
No. And even though there was talk at the same time about, what's the thing about the property thing,
the property rights,
yeah. So that you would be, there would be
a right to housing.
The right to housing, a natural right to housing. Like what? You can just walk into another country and demand a house.
Yeah, but
where else does this happen?
What is housing? I remember talking to a local councillor and he says, everyone has the right to a house. And I went, okay, well, what does this house look like? Is it a flat? Is it an apartment? Is it a shed? Is it a cell? These are the questions people wasn't asking.
No, but also
if I put 100 cattle into a slatted shed and there's 10 in each pen, they're housed.
But you see, when you think it through, then the question to that is, well, no matter what the accommodation is like, and of course it can be terrible, but it still costs money. So that implies that there's somebody needs to build it.
Yes.
There's work involved that needs to be paid for. And the thing is that with the free money thing, or the fake money thing, people think, oh, well, sure, they just make more money. But you see, every single cent of that is leaving a trail behind it, a trail of accountability and responsibility and paybackability.
Yeah.
Like, somebody ultimately has to pay the price for that. And the thing is, money is only paper. The payment is always in something else that is never mentioned. It's in the loss of something. And in this case, it's the loss of our country.
Yes.
All of this fake money is converging in a balance sheet in which one day, and it won't be too far removed, Mr. Fink, from the CEO of BlackRock, will arrive and he will sit down with the principals of our government, God help us, and he will say, how are you lads? Well, here, I'll tell you what now. I've been around the place, we had a few days down the west and down in Cork, and we were looking at everything, and, we had a good sell, so we did a bit of a tally up on the whole thing, and we were thinking, the whole thing is worth, I don't know, could be worth maybe 250 trillion, or something like that order. Now I'm just plucking that out of my ear. But the downside of it is, lads, these chits here, lads, you're really sticking the boat in here now, We're looking here at nearly 50% more of deaths. So that gives us a bit of a problem. And now I've been talking to obviously we represent 94% of the creditors involved in this, and we've been doing consultations. And what they're basically saying is, look, I'll tell you what, we'll write off the additional 50%.
Yeah.
If you just vacate the property at the earliest possible. Yeah. We would like vacant possession of Ireland.
Yeah. Yeah, see, and it's so close, and people can't figure it out.
No.
And I was sitting down with a gent last week, and he was an optimistic fella. He's optimistic. And I says, no, Matt, I says, you're delusional. With AI and robotics, there's no longer the requirement for as large a slave class, and they don't want them.
Well, you see, James, like, people think, what's happening isn't actually replacement, really, in this sense, that those who replace will themselves be superfluous in due course. They're only there as a kind of a cleaning agent, you see, because what they've done is they've created a kind of a cyclical force field, which is doing two things. It's sucking the native population out and depositing them in all places, in Canada and Australia and everywhere else. And it's bringing these others in as though permanent replacement, but they're not intended to be permanent replacement.
You see, this is the part people can't get their head.
Yeah. So
they're not a replacement. It's like if you're buying a farm of land, and there's an old man who lives across from the farm of land. You go to him and you say, would you ever a few pound there, you might show me where the water troughs is, and he'll know where they are.
Yeah.
Was there ever a well on this place? Do you know, if I open a drain in that field, where does the water gather in the winter? He knows it all.
He knows it all.
You get rid of Mr. Old Man, nobody knows.
Yeah.
Nobody knows who owns it. No. When there's enough foreign entities in the nation, all of a sudden, people don't remember which river the salmon was in. You have lost all of that.
Well, you see, that's the thing that I've been saying about this, that ultimately the balance sheet will account for every tree, every mountain, every blade of grass.
Fink has said this. It's the economy of everything. They intend for each and everything to be traded on the market.
That's right.
But I'll put this to you. You change the native population. So at the moment, there's Croagh-Patrick. Anyone who climbs Croagh-Patrick with any brain towards geology, it's filled with gold. It's quartz. It's the whole way up. It's Holy Mountain, all the rest of it. Well, if you get rid of Mr. Paddy, Mr. Macmoot doesn't care if you dig it.
No.
Paddy does. Mr. McMoot doesn't care if you put a hydroelectric plant onto such a river that was a salmon migratory river. He doesn't care.
This is the process, James, that's underway.
Yes.
This is exactly it. You've nailed it. This is exactly right. This is exactly what they're doing. You see, it's the materialization of everything and the tokenization of everything.
Yes.
Everything will have a value. Every grain of sand will have a value.
Yeah.
It will be a property.
Yeah.
It will be owned. They will just claim it and they will write their name on it. And out of that then will come an entirely different kind of economics that will completely supplant the human endeavour kind of economics which we've been used to, which is basically work, what we call work, the work, labour they come. But look what's happened. I mean, it's already, the signs are there. Look what's happened in politics. Look what's happened to the left and right kind of idea. You hear these gobshite journalists talking about the far right. They have no idea what they're talking about, you know, as if what leftism was purely a matter of kind of compassion and kindness, you know, it's kind of like if it was liberation theology or something, you know. But in fact, what we're looking at here is that you look at the way that the Democratic Party, which used to represent the blue-collar workers of the United States,
Had abandoned them.
abandoned them completely. So that now Trump has stepped in and said, okay, well, let's try something else here.
Yeah.
And then nobody sees this. They say, oh, big orange man bad. You know, but look, you know, it's a mysterious kind of coalition for sure between this man and these people. They're about as opposite as you can get in many respects. But they love him.
Yeah.
And he's doing what they want. And so, but the people don't seem to realize that this is all, that all these are symptoms of the collapse of the work economy, the labour economy.
Well, you see, I get back to what I said earlier about hitting the targets, and you're hitting the targets people don't see. You see, I look around Ireland at the moment, and you have the left-wing activists and the right-wing activists, and they hate each other, and it's a bit of division and all this.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is, on any day, if you asked all of them to show up, there might be a couple hundred on either side.
Yeah.
They're just a really, really loud minority. And then you have this whole group of people in the middle who are wholesalely unaware about what's about to occur. And the only analogy that I can think about it at the minute is, imagine you had a stable in New York, and one day you see Mr. Fortson's yoke passing by, and someone says, that's the future. Now, you had two options as your stable owner that you could go, I'm over. It's finished. Once that takes off, it's done. Or you could say, it'll never happen. And at the moment, 90% of people are going, nah, it'll never happen. And that's the trouble. Like in this general election, what politician did you hear talking about automation, robotics, artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency? They're all still talking about yesterday's issues.
Yes, and all of these issues, all these matters, James, have gotten off the democratic leash, insofar as there ever was a democratic leash. I mean, it was mainly a fake leash. But, you know, for the last 30, 35 years, the whole technological thing has gone underground.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you think of it this way, we were having debates as a society about freedom of speech, you know, as you should, all the rest of it. Absolutely no one was speaking that there's a piece of technology that's on the verge of becoming sentient. It's a piece of technology that, for all purposes, will be more intelligent than all of humanity combined.
That's right.
And then you have quantum computing in that, and no one is talking about it.
No, that's right. And what they didn't understand, what has happened, which is something that, say, 50 years ago was unpredictable. It was not something you would have foreseen at all, or you would have said, no, that cannot happen. Well, what has happened is that all of this technology has gone into the private sector.
Yes.
It is now owned. It's not publicly owned in any sense whatsoever. The public realm has virtually zero purchase on what happens within that sector. There was a book came out a couple of years ago by, I think it was Kurzweil. He's a Google guy and another guy and a tech guy who wasn't known, or it might have been Schmidt. Not sure. But the key figure was Kissinger.
Yes.
And it was an extraordinary book because it's written by three people, and you wouldn't be sure in any given situation or in any paragraph who wrote what and so on. So it's fascinating in that sense. But ultimately, it was a manifesto, and it was basically saying, right, we're okay, we've got it sorted now. We've it all worked out, and here's the deal. And the deal is, we'll run this, you'll sit there and keep your mouth shut and do what you're told.
Yeah.
And the future will then unfold as we have planned it. And that's something that should never have happened in democratic societies. Because I remember, I've said this multiple times, back in the mid-'80s when I was an editor of various magazines and involved with alternative magazines in Ireland, we were running articles that time about the future of work in the context of technological progress, so-called. And AI hadn't been invented, the concept hadn't been invented, but the idea that technological innovation would make human beings obsolescent, by and large, was a very live issue. And people were talking and writing and philosophizing about how then, because it's not an obvious thing, how do you create motivation, meaning within societies after the people have stopped working? Because it's a big question, and it maybe doesn't have an answer.
But it's even the relevance of physical attributes are about to be made meaningless. Because at the moment, most girls are fully aware of it. They take a picture, they filter it, they have a screen. It's not her you're looking at, it's a better version of that. But what they haven't clocked yet is Mr. Nerd sits at his computer, puts his glasses on, and he says, oh, there's all these women making a lot of money by just, getting their tits out or that. Sure, I'll make an avatar for that. And all of a sudden, he's making money off the perception.
Well, you see, this is the thing, in many respects, James, what we would describe as madness in society isn't really madness in that sense. I mean, the word is inadequate up to a point. It doesn't convey how appalling it is in some respects to somebody who is used to a certain way of seeing reality. But at another level, you can see going forward from that, from where we're going with the trans thing and with the AI thing and with different things, the attacks on the family and gay marriage and all these things, the breaking up of traditional families. The consequences of that are enormous because they're remaking the future in a way that won't be human at all. And already we can see the signs of that. In that book, Give Us Back the Bad Roads, I talked about two appalling rooms in modern Ireland that really are unspeakable. And one is the room where the babies are deposited onto the mat at 7 o'clock in the morning to crawl around as best they may for half the day or a full day, on the one hand. And then on the other hand, up the street, there's another room where there's around the perimeter of a room, there's like about 30 or 40 elderly people who are
walking in a circle.
They're sitting there and they're not talking to each other, but there's a TV blaring up in the corner.
Yes.
They're doped up to here. This is, when I was a child, like all the old people in the area, and particularly out in the country where my grandmother lived, all the old people were sitting around. They would sit on the windowsill and look or talk to passers-by and shout down, and people would stop and shout over the gate. And, we were, they were valued.
Yeah.
And they were part of everything. And they were part of a family. And people went to them for advice. And, well, what did you do in the old days? And what all. Now that's all gone.
Yeah.
But see, to put into the other mix then, to put in the mix then other things like divorce has fragmented families.
Yeah.
So now it has divided loyalties in terms of inheritance, in terms of looking after elderly people, in terms of money, in terms of all these things. And so the whole thing is fragmenting.
Yeah.
And now, like one of the things that really shocked me when I started to look into this whole AI thing and robotics and so on, it was not the mechanical as such. That's in itself fascinating, but it was a rights-based issue. And the conclusion was this, that in the future, old people might well be looked after by robots.
Yes.
you would have your own robot and you'd give it a name
Yeah.
and it would be living in the house with you. And would be, as effective, theoretically anyway, and more we can see the potential of these technologies. They're extraordinary. As good as a human being, maybe better, because it doesn't tire so easily and there's no attitude as such on this, But then became the real kicker that because of certain circumstances, it would become necessary to generate robot rights.
Yes. I've already said this to people when they're using their Alexa and their things like that. I said, be polite. And they go, what?
Yes.
And I says, you don't realise that thing's generational model down the line, it'll remember.
It'll remember. But the other side of that, which is in anticipation of all of that, was the idea which I came across that precisely because in dealing with a robot, there's a certain sense of an anthropomorphic kind of relationship. It's a kind of a human to human. There's that undertone, even though it's a robot. And because there is, the requirement exists, therefore, to treat that robot in the same way as you would a human. In other words, for the reason that, not that in particular that the robot doesn't have feelings, but if people got into the habit of speaking to robots in a certain way or treating robots in a certain way that was kind of cruel or might be seen as cruel if it was done to a human, then there's a danger of contagion into the way that people see each other. And for that reason, you need a whole charter of rights for the robots, which are indistinguishable from the rights of human beings, so as to avoid that kind of behavior and to make that criminal. In other words, locking your robot under the stairs would be a criminal offense. Not because the robot would care, you could switch the robot off, but because by doing that, you might subsequently be in danger of doing the same thing to a human being. Isn't that fantastic?
Oh my God, that's some thought. On that note, we'll finish the first section, John, and we'll move on to Patreon because, I'm looking forward to this section. So anyone, if you head to Patreon or Spotify, and you'll get the next section with the wonderful John Waters. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Still to come in part 2 of the show.
Well, this is the year I think that the whole thing culminates, and it gave the start date as March 2020. The end date was March 2025. There's already been a rehearsal with Johns Hopkins University and Bill Gates, and the same people, same personnel as from event. We have a pseudo-reality and we have a deeply, profoundly corrupt media that you get this barrage of, conspiracy theory from people who don't even know whether what they're saying is true or not. As the managers of Ireland, but Ireland was basically taken over by outside interests, particularly predominantly the American deep state, and of course our old friends, the West. Classic example is, we were locked down and we were required to get vaccines in order to liberate ourselves and so on. But at the same time, they were flying in hundreds of thousands of migrants who didn't need any vaccine.
Yes. Bible sales have increased by 27%.
Yes.